All right, please welcome from the Beyond Binary Thinking podcast, Chris and Maren.
Thanks for having us, Trevor.
Thank
Absolute
you.
pleasure.
Thank you.
I feel I need to clear the air first because was it you I was talking with on Reddit?
Probably. It might have been.
Yeah, I'd had a little bit to drink, and I think I opened the conversation with "Come fight me,"
Yes.
which was perhaps not the best international diplomacy move. The
Well,
British.
and I think my response was, "I'll be happy to argue with you."
Yeah, and I even want to dial it down a notch from that. So to be honest, having had your podcast, I'm a big fan. I think we're going to disagree on some things.
Sure.
But the world doesn't need two people shouting at each other, not listening again. So I'd actually really like to open this up to a more positive and constructive conversation and genuinely like hear you out and listen to your side. And where we disagree, like that's okay. Like and learn from that experience. So.
Well, I've listened to at least portions of several episodes of your show, and I'm curious about the name because I'm guessing it was intentional to conjure certain reactions, possibly to alienate people you don't want and draw in the audience that you do want. I mean, obviously, like even our podcast has a name that when people hear it, they make assumptions, and some of that is on purpose. So I'm curious about the name because I of course immediately, like I think most people do, thought of non-binary gender. But it's more, you guys are exploring the nuance, the fact that the world isn't black and white.
Right, or left and right.
Yeah.
And I think people, for obvious reasons, get into these sports teams, right? Like I'm a member of this tribe and everyone that disagrees with me is wrong and racist and an idiot and needs to leave the country sort of argument. And I understand why. I very much believe we're still cavemen.
It was Blood Dutch for cheers.
But yeah, it just hurts. And it's just obvious that not always, but when you actually sit down and have a beer with someone, even if they might vote differently to you, despite what the political pundits and talking heads say, there is a lot of common ground. And it always bothered me, actually, as an independent thinker, the idea that if I know what you feel, which color you vote for, I can guess how you feel about abortion and foreign aid and military intervention and all of these 100 different issues. A lot of people are quite comfortable just getting put in one of two buckets, right? Oh, therefore you feel the same way about these 18 other policy issues. And that's not actually how most people think. So we're just trying to explore the nuance. I think sometimes we debate, sometimes people think we're a centrist show. So we'll like have someone left on, have someone right on, and we'll be like, oh, but let's just be friends. It's not even about that. I just think it's never as simple, as you said, as black and white. And so this, I went into your show having some assumptions, and then listening to it, I've realized that you do explore some nuances. So let's get into it. Before I make any assumptions, why don't you describe to me what your show is to you and your listeners?
Well, let me tell you how the show kind of started first. My co-host actually wrote a book intended to be a guide for single moms raising boys, which presents a very specific challenge. He was raised by a single mom, but luckily she found the Boy Scouts for him. And so he had something to kind of channel that masculine male aggression into that was more constructive. And then later he started working as I guess handyman is the best description. He does like remodeling and stuff like that, contracting type work. And he started to see that a lot of the guys that would try to get jobs with him, he was running his own business, didn't know a screwdriver from a wrench and that sort of thing. And the pattern that he saw with a lot of these guys was that they were raised by just a mom. And he kind of went, well, I was raised by just a mom, but what's different about what happened with me? And so he wrote the book. The book did not get published. This was back when you had to actually go to a publisher and couldn't self-publish. So he later got a job with a radio station, and part of his contract was he wanted to have a radio show. This was an internet radio station. So he started doing Man Tools, and that was the title of the book as well. And then I got kind of swept up into it. I'm actually the second co-host that he had, but I'm the one that stuck, I guess. And then the radio station kind of folded, and we started doing things ourselves as a podcast. So I like to call us a men's issues media outlet, because I tend to shy away from the term men's rights, and also we're not necessarily activists, which is a term that you'll see sometimes on the internet, men's rights activists.
Yeah, and I think before we get into the men's rights movement, I think too many people are quick to label themselves activists.
Sure.
You're familiar with the term slacktivist, right?
Right, yeah.
Keyboard warriors. You're like, you're not really very active for an activist.
No. And I'm, neither of us are definite. You would, I can't imagine a scenario where you could see either me or Eric, my co-host, marching with a fucking sign, or anything like that. So yeah, our goal is to make content that, first off, shed some light on, like I said, men's issues, not necessarily rights that men don't have, which, I mean, that's a legal thing. Number one, rights are a legal thing certainly in the US, and I think most of what I would call the Western world. I can't think of a right that a man has that a woman doesn't, or vice versa. You know what I mean? Generally under our legal system, there's not anything that women can do that men aren't allowed to do, or that men can do that women aren't.
Controversial off the bat, I like it. Okay,
yeah.
So before I do the obvious and radio talk show battle you, let's see where we agree, right?
Okay, sure.
So I think that often well-educated, middle-class white women complaining about how hard their lives are, you understand why they're not always met with the sympathy they feel they deserve. They're probably quite a privileged class by definition, right? And to the average working class person, anyone that's been through any struggles, terms like privilege, right, the masculine privilege, the patriarchy, toxic masculinity, you see why that rubs people the wrong way. So my background is marketing, and I think often where these terms come from is quite academic, right? It's someone studying women's studies or gender studies, and none of us have enough time in the day to study that sort of thing. So I can see why they're controversial and upsetting. I can feel the feminists furiously getting on Twitter right now. So hear me out, ladies. I think the flip side of that coin, to be fair and to give their due, is that I think it's one thing to discuss it at an academic level. I think what they actually mean is quite nuanced, and you probably wouldn't disagree with it if you heard the argument out. So you're familiar with the term straw man, right?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. And I feel what sometimes happens, like the reason we heard of toxic masculinity and privilege was from right-wing talking heads announcing how stupid this idea was. That was my first, I actually said, the first time I heard of the Black Lives Matter movement was, I think, Ben Shapiro talking about how stupid the Black Lives Matter movement was. And I think we sometimes get this straw man impression of these arguments from people quite quick to shoot them down. Does that make sense to you?
Yep, absolutely.
So I think I've argued with a few feminists who've been quite angry by the idea of me as a man telling them what they experience as a woman. And I've tried to point out, but you do know that happens quite a lot with men. We're quite often told that we're bad and we're wrong and our masculinity is negative. Right?
Exactly, yeah.
It cuts both ways.
Yes, absolutely. But like I said, that's why I try to shy away from, I don't know if shy away is correct the right word. I don't try to go down the men's rights rabbit hole, because it's a ridiculous premise that there is somehow things that under the law, and again, once you start saying the word rights, that's where you're going, is into some kind of legal. Is there anything that a woman has a right to do that a man doesn't? And it's like, not under our system of government. They can, women can pretty much get into any job that they're qualified for. Same thing with men. Now you get into some things where I guess some industries like modeling and film, obviously they can cast based on gender and race and things like that. But you don't hear much outcry. Well, I shouldn't say that, because recently you have heard a lot of, there's not enough people of color involved in the film industry, which that may be a legitimate argument. I haven't done.
Well, I watched Black Panther for the first time like last week, because the main actor died, unfortunately. That finally prompted me to watch it, and I was amazed by how I recognized every single actor in it.
Yeah.
You realize how small the roster is. You're like, I know all of these guys.
But I think that's I think that speaks to Jordan Peterson brings this up a lot, that there seems to be a problem where people have an expectation for equality of outcome as opposed to an equality of opportunity. And they seem to think that if there's this percentage of this segment of the population in general, that should automatically translate into every occupation, every every hobby, every, and that's just not how that's going to work out. You're never going to make it work out that way. And the attempts to do so seem to be more destructive, I think, than constructive.
So if you thought I was going to debate on this, you might be surprised.
Yeah.
I have looked into it, and it's three white guys talking about feminism. So.
Yeah.
I'm sure it'll be taken with a pinch of salt
from our ivory tower,
or thoroughly applauded by the guys who've got our back. I think if you deep dive into the numbers, there's a few obvious things, like women aren't paid less than men for the same job, right? That doesn't really happen, and that's not what the figures show. What it does show is that for society or biology or for whatever reason, there is more pressure on a woman when kids come to take a break from work, and men don't do that as much. And which is why I'll propose sometimes like enforcing paternity leave, like if you're going to give women time off, make men take time off too. Like I think things like that can stop the wage gap, like could really help. Because as you said in the example, like I think it is tough for a young man to be raised without a male role model. Now, sometimes that's through completely no father figure, but sometimes it's just like in my case where the dad's away working so much that you barely see him.
Sure, yeah. Yep.
So they actually did that in the Netherlands just recently. They went from 3 days paternity leave to 3 weeks paternity leave. Which is okay, but 3 days is horrible still where we were just half a year ago, right? 3 days where your child is born, you hardly even get to see your own child.
Yeah. Now, is that mandatory that it be taken? Because I think that's what Chris was saying was kind of it's not an option. You're going to be off from this date to this date once you say,
and your employer will pay for it, right?
Yeah.
Ooh, I wouldn't know if it's mandatory. I think it's still voluntary.
Okay. Yeah.
But at least it's now an option, whereas before it wasn't even an option.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Or if you had holiday days, sure. But if you don't have any vacation days anymore, that you can sacrifice for it. Now,
see, in the States, they don't mandate a lot of that stuff. In fact, I actually am a federal government employee. I work for the Air Force here. And one example that I was kind of surprised by is I guess our military now has gone to, regardless of which parent you are, this is the amount of time that you're going to, and it's not necessarily mandatory, but this is the amount of time that we're going to allow you to take I forget what they call it, because they don't even specify maternity and paternity anymore because of this. It's like childbirth leave, and that's it,
So it's gender neutral there.
It just
Yeah.
seems healthy though,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
and I worry if it's optional, then I can see an employer kind of being like frowning on it and being like, okay, but we'll see you for the sales meeting on Thursday, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. I could see that for
If
sure.
you leave it optional, there's very few employers that'll be like, okay,
I've
yeah,
worked
that's
at
fine.
I've worked at some places that kind of have the it reminds me of the pieces of flair scene from Office Space, if you remember that. Well, yeah, 50 is the minimum, but come on.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what I worry, right? Like where you leave the free market to decide it. The theory is that people are free to go work for a nicer boss, but what ends up happening, and you see this, like in Europe where you have stricter labor laws, you have a lot longer holidays, a lot happier people. Sort of people have a lot more time with their families, right?
Right. Yeah, yeah. Now this may surprise you. I'm not necessarily opposed to a lot of that things within what I would call the European model. My position, at least in the US, is that they're not practical for our federal government to do because we're such a large country. I think a lot of them would work on a state level where, you know, if Colorado wanted to say, pass some of these similar labor requirements and restrictions, absolutely. But I don't think it works for our federal government to do kind of cookie cutter policies.
Okay, so you're not a libertarian fundamentalist, right? But you don't believe
No.
one size fits all because
Definitely not. No.
Yeah.
I in fact I try to stress whenever I spell out, when I'm talking about my own politics, I make it a point to use a small L and a small C when I say I'm conservative leaning or libertarian leaning. And I try to say the word leaning because I don't fit into an absolute for any of that.
right.
I generally like to think of myself as someone who can look at policies and go, well, this is stupid, even if, you know, regardless of what party came up with it, or this is great, even if it came from, you know, a party that I may not generally agree with, which I think is, despite what the media and the internet would have you believe, is how most people approach their lives. You know, I think that's something that we get bombarded with. Well, you have to pick a side, or you have to, you know, it's left or right. That's it, and that's just ridiculous.
But the funny thing is that even though everyone thinks that they're deciding based on rationale and logic thinking, we still have a 50-50 split either way with most issues.
Yeah,
right?
we do.
So
Well,
everyone thinks they're on the right side, but in the
state,
end, we're still divided with their own righteous
the
thinking.
big thing, though, is in a two-party state, right? Like when you live in a thing where you only get to vote once every 5 years for red or blue, then yeah, things kind of have to be split down the middle.
I was going to say, I'm curious how much of that boils down to people buying the lesser of two evils argument that oftentimes gets thrown. You know, if perfect example here in the States, I don't know if you realize this, but we don't actually, under the law, have a two-party system. It's just that they seem to have monopolized our system. So you have,
that's what always happens, right? And this is why I was interested with you as a libertarian. Like Jordan Peterson talks about this himself, right? The Pareto law, the effect of power. It's like gravity, right? Like things just tend to, the powerful get more powerful. And that's where you end up in trouble. So I think the reason we have a two-party state is the same reason we have big corporations running everything. Right?
Right. Yeah. Which is like, you know, a perfect example of what's going on lately is I consider myself a free speech absolutist. I don't think the state has any business trying to protect anyone's feelings. I just don't.
I'm going to deep dive on that. So I used to define myself as a free speech absolutist, but what about inciting race riots?
Well,
shouting fire in a crowded movie theater, like everyone draws a line somewhere.
Because that's always an example that gets brought up to me, and here's my point of view on that. I don't necessarily think it should be a crime to yell fire in the auditorium, but that person should be billed for every ticket that was sold. They should be billed for the emergency responders that had to show up, and it should clearly, there should be a responsibility and a burden on their part. I don't know that they should be imprisoned or
just monetary.
I don't know. That's
So if I'm Ayatollah Shamani standing on the in my mosque telling everyone to go outside and kill everyone, as long as I pay the invoices that come my way,
no,
fine.
I was getting very specific on the shouting fire.
Okay.
it's
But no, like you
interesting.
say, there's a line somewhere, right?
There has to.
Everyone
Yes,
says they're an
absolutely.
absolutist, but there's
Yeah.
always a line somewhere.
That's a tough one because that guy may be saying that. For example, Charles Manson never killed anybody. He never stuck a knife in anybody, never pulled a trigger, but his words appeared to have convinced everyone around him that that was a great idea, and they all did it. And now he recently died, but he spent his life,
could be
the
said
rest
for
of his
any
life in
mafia
prison.
boss, right? Like they probably rarely get their hands dirty. They just paid the guy to do it.
And that's one of those things where I don't necessarily know where that line is.
I'm pretty sure you've skirted past the line if you think that's okay.
Well, yeah.
I'm quietly confident that is past the line.
But I don't know. See, I don't know when it comes to like the law, because he from what I understand, the crimes that he was convicted of, he shouldn't have received a life sentence, but they just made sure that motherfucker stayed in jail because they recognized that he was dangerous. Now, I don't know. I certainly can't argue. I certainly couldn't come up with a good argument for letting Charles Manson roam free. So you got me.
So actually, there's two very interesting examples of exactly what you're talking about going on or happened in the Netherlands. One of which is the fire argument. There was a person, we had a World War II remembrance every year in Amsterdam on the big square, and they put flowers near a monument to remember the soldiers that died. And one person shouted, I don't remember what he shouted, but he shouted something which led to a mass stampede of people, right? So everyone trying to get out, trampling over each other. And I think he got sentenced to prison, but not for a very long time. But, here they found the fines not enough. And this Friday, very, very interesting, there's going to be a court decision on a case against Geert Wilders.
Oh, yeah. I'm familiar with him.
For those that aren't, can you give a quick summary?
Now, this is a politician in the Netherlands, and he's part of a nationalist party in the Netherlands. And in 2014, he had what Trump does, the speeches with a lot of people there.
Oh, a big rally?
Yeah, a rally. And he said on a rally, he asked the crowd, do we want more or less Moroccans in the Netherlands? And he had people shouting, less Moroccans, less Moroccans, less Moroccans, like chanting this. And since 2014, so it's been 6 years now, they've been trying to convict him for inciting hate and discrimination. And this is for Holland a very famous case in where does the line for free speech lies, right? Can you incite a crowd to want to just remove a certain public of the Netherlands?
We've disagreed on this in the past, Marijn, because for me, that's a debate about immigration, and I would fall on the line of free speech there and say you can hate it, you can argue it, but it doesn't seem to be let's kill them, let's hurt them. It's just right. I would like less of them here, which seems okay. Not a position on immigration I necessarily agree with, even, but I would defend someone's right to have a controversial, wrong opinion.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at death threats are not really being prosecuted much. There's too many of them online anyway. But people getting bombarded with legitimate, sometimes, or probably not legitimate, but the threat of violence against them, murder violence, killing violence, it's not something that's necessarily trials.
So it sounds like a lot of what, not just Trump, but a lot of what a lot of politicians in other countries say would be illegal in the Netherlands. Is that right?
I think free speech is very much upheld, and it's only when it comes to actions that's really an issue. I don't know what the court decision is going to be on Friday, but I can imagine, Chris, that what they're going to decide is, that it is a political opinion that he has, and there was no assignment for anyone to go have any violence against someone else.
Okay. That's often like this debate, and the political talking heads, they frame it as a war on free speech, and what it actually is lawyers and judges, and in the end, sense will prevail, and the judge will decide, no, it's not illegal, right? Like there was a big case recently with Ben Shapiro, and he tried to sue a university because they put him in a different room than he thought he'd be in on the campus. Have you read this news story?
I haven't, no.
So he tried to sue the university for, hindering his free speech. And it was a pretty, the sort of case that was whipped up by Breitbart. Oh, the university banned his free speech. When you look into it, you're like, they just said, look, this room is more secure than the main room. It's slightly smaller, but last time you went on campus, you caused, a $600,000 fee for security and damages by the protesters. So sorry, guys, but we're going to move you to a different room. And he tried to sue, and he's clearly a better talking head than he is a lawyer because he lost the lawsuit.
Yeah. No, I hadn't read about that, but I have. He's come up in the news a number of times for particularly universities either canceling his events at the last minute or similar things. And back to the kind of inciting something with that politician you were talking about earlier. I'd be curious, could they point to anyone actually being harmed because he said those words? You know what I mean?
No,
numbers
not
of
at all.
people, being. I guess that would be something that the courts would that would be what they would be looking at is.
And that's the line I think most of us on both sides. That's the line we draw in the sand, right? Like, has anyone been hurt? No, then okay. The problem I think we all face is that there is an industry of people whose job it is to make mountains out of molehills, right? Like stir storms in teacups and do the straw man thing. Like, it's just really lazy journalism when you see someone be like, oh, look, someone stupid is angry on Twitter about this thing. You're like, that's not news. Like, if you've been on Twitter, there's someone angry about anything.
Well, I think it's and there are many examples, but I think it's another example of kind of the double-edged sword that is the internet. Because of the internet, your kind of, I guess, legacy news outlets, TV, print, those sorts of things have started losing huge market shares. And so they've made the transition to online, but now they're like, well, we basically need clickbait to get people to see our ads, which is where they make their money. So they need headlines where sometimes once you start reading the article, the headline has very little, if anything, to do with the meat of the article. And it's all about views. They want whoever they can get to look at their product, and therefore get an ad in their face from somebody that's paying them.
Yeah. And I see this on both sides. So, like, this is, the whole premise of the podcast and everything we do. I think both sides are equally guilty about it. It's been really frustrating for me watching in my country anyone that, supports any conservative policy whatsoever, or anything they do is just branded as a racist idiot.
Yeah.
And it's that funny thing where, seeing it from the European, which is probably left of your news with most of its perspective anyway. Yeah, I've just laughed at, oh God, yeah, Bush, and then Trump. Oh no, ridiculous, everything they do. But I've also, seen the holes in that argument, right? Like the idea that, you're either with us or you're racist and stupid is the worst advertising campaign a political party can ever do. And I really think if you're a Democrat, blue and true, right, you just have to realize that you're not persuading anyone by calling everyone a racist idiot.
No, and here's what I really don't understand is that seemed to be kind of what happened in 2016. But they're trying it again. And it's like, do you not realize that this was your pitfall 4 years ago? Why don't you try, let's, do a different
So I have
tactic,
a theory. I know why. And this is why it's really interesting talking to my friends who are left of the Democrat Party, right? And I don't know how you feel about AOC, for example. We'll get into that in a second. But I don't believe either the Democrat or the Republican Party represents the majority of the citizenry's interest. I think they represent the corporations that sponsor them.
Sure, yeah.
And most of those corporations pay both sides. Like, we know this.
Yep.
Like, we know this to be true. Right? Like, after the last recession, Goldman Sachs, who were partly responsible for the economic crash, then got given more power. So I completely understand people who voted for Trump and believed his promise to drain the swamp. I actually entirely sympathize with that. I entirely sympathize with the idea that Hillary, Goldman Sachs, Blackwater, Lockheed Martin, Clinton was not going to represent their interests, and it was just going to be more of the same. But my question at this point is, what part of the swamp has Trump drained? Because he's mostly got his family involved. It seems to resemble North Korea at the moment.
Well,
his son-in-law is running half of the government at this point.
No, he's well, I should say officially he's an advisor. I don't know how much of what he says just goes with, everyone else there. He may be the de facto chief of staff. I don't know. To be honest.
I mean, he's fired so many people, I'm not sure what staff he's leading.
Yeah, I don't either. But and the other question, I guess, is he failing to drain the swamp but making an attempt and we just don't see that? Or is it just he got in there and he's like, fuck it, I can't do this.
Effort and a participation trophy?
No, I'm not saying that. But, is it that the attempt's being made and it's just not a possible task? Or is it that he didn't even try when he got there? And I don't know which is the right answer, because like you said, I don't see any swamp draining. About the only thing that at least recently that I could point to, that's where it's like, especially in this climate, the left-leaning Democratic Party, once you get into facts, they don't have much to stand on, is talking about criminal justice reform. Obama was in there for 8 years and did none of that. And Trump did get some legislation done that vastly reformed sentencing guidelines and some other things that result in many more or many less, I should say, people of color being in prison for petty bullshit, which is one thing that he's never going to get kind of public credit for, which is points to the dishonesty going on with the left side that's supporting Black Lives Matter and Antifa, but then saying he's the enemy even though he's doing stuff like that.
Yeah. So you do see it. Like, I noticed, Trump definitely has made some massive missteps towards the BLM movement, and he's been a bit behind the curve on things.
Yeah.
But then, like, later on, once the cycle gets going and the lazy press is like, okay, this is the story, we're running with it. I saw a story yesterday where you're like, yeah, it was just a non-story. You know what I mean? Once the cycle goes and you're like, this is the story we're running with, this is the narrative we're running with, you're with us or you're racist, right? Like, I mean, I'd like to drill down on that though, because I do remember Obama pushing to end the war on drugs and petty legislation. And what often happens with government is it's quite slow to act.
Sure, yeah.
So what specifically did Trump do? I don't need you to provide all sources. I get this.
No.
But yeah,
I'll give you my
impression that Trump specifically did.
My understanding
that
was
Obama
that
failed to do.
My understanding was that he secured the votes in Congress for it to pass and then signed it into law, which is something that Obama couldn't seem to get done. And now the flip to that
isn't there an argument that Obama couldn't get anything done because the Republicans were dragging their feet at every point when they had the other two houses?
Oh,
right?
that's a potential argument. Sure. That's what I was going to bring up, was that the other argument is that you have a completely different House of Representatives and Senate now than you did at the tail end of Obama's term. So that certainly makes a difference. I don't know how much. I haven't dug into like the math of the votes that he could have got. I also don't know if the legislation was even brought up when he was.
So what was it when Obama was in power? The other houses were so ineffective at voting anything through. I think they got more done than there's this famous historical period where everything was closed. And I think they were still more effective because they were just resisting Obama at every point. They were playing politics, right? Like gerrymandering, like filibustering, all the bullshit. So that's the counter argument. Is like, it just seems a bit disingenuous for Republicans to be like, but this is the funny thing, is that I think you always get more done with a Republican with his heart in the right place.
Well, I mean, the problem,
because they can push more through, right?
I think it's also, well, you're so divided that cooperation is not in the vocabulary anymore. It's so much competition that here in the Netherlands, we have the benefit of having a more distributed house of government, with some parties on the right, some parties on the left, some parties in the middle. And sometimes we have an election where a large part of the country vote on one right party on the right side of the balance, and the other large part of the country votes on the left side to one party. So you get two big parties. And we had a situation where neither of the two parties could make a government on their own, so they made a government together. Yeah. Right. So the public still voted left and right separately, and it was still divided. But then the parties still had to cooperate to make a government work, and they made an effective government work.
That is something that's missing from our system, which the British and Europeans clearly have, is the ability to make what's known as a coalition government. We can't do that. It's you're either the other flip to that, though, is how your elections work. From what I understand, under the British system, is that the prime minister is elected first as a member of parliament, and that's not, as obviously Trump was never in politics before, so he just became the president.
Well, you can have a minister president even here that has no experience in politics. It wouldn't be really common for that to be a leader of a party. But
it's coming. You're going to have an Instagram model filling the role, real soon.
Maybe, yeah. But in America, as long as Republicans and Democrats can't even consider to be in the same coalition, which is the coalition to run the government and run the country, it's always going to be a very difficult situation, I think, to solve things. And maybe the solution is to have more of a state-divided government again.
Yeah, I mean, we can negotiate policy and things, but let's be honest here. The reason why there's no reaching across the aisle is the Republican Party has no interest whatsoever in collaborating with Democrats on anything, right? That's Mitch McConnell's scorched earth policy.
I think the opposite, though, is true too. I don't think Pelosi and those guys will do any reaching across the aisle about anything either. Which, I mean, I
mean, on what, for example? What would you like them to?
Oh, I don't have an issue offhand that I can think of, but I was going to point out that at one time, obviously this was a long time ago, the Republican Party was our third party. We used to have the Whigs and the Democrats, and I'm curious to see if the political landscape then was kind of coming to a head. And what seemed to burst forth was what we now call the GOP, and Lincoln was kind of the figurehead of that party, of course, when he became president. But I'm curious, and I guess we'll just have to wait and see if something like that happens again, where maybe some kind of third party bursts onto the scene that people go, oh shit, these guys actually maybe have my best interest at heart, and surprise.
I hope so, because I got to be honest. Like I've been listening to a phenomenal podcast about how likely a civil war is to break out in the US, and it's filled me with despair.
Well,
so
and obviously Lincoln being elected did not prevent that war.
Yeah. Okay, well, we're not going to get too deep in the weeds of political machinations. I think something fun to talk about. I'm going to have to hold you to task on this.
Okay.
Why are you guys anti-mask? Like, come on. Really?
I'm number one. In fact, I think it may have been a British study that I was just reading about that said the quote was that there's actually no compelling evidence either way. So to mandate masks with no compelling evidence either way, I think is, to put a point on it, statist bullshit. And our episode, if you watch that, the conclusion was to go ahead and comply, just be malicious about it. Because you're just going to ruin the day of some poor Walmart greeter. You're not going to actually stick it to the man by not wearing your mask.
So,
Can I ask, right? As an alternative to the mask, would you agree with mandatory distancing?
You mean mandated by the state?
Social distancing.
Mandated by the government. Social distancing.
I
Everyone has to always stay.
I don't approve of much of anything when it comes to mandates from the government. No.
Well, the mask mandate is then it's just a blanket argument against any attempt from the government
that's part of it. Yeah, that's a big part of it,
right? And I think you're allowed to have that opinion, for sure.
I hope so.
Yeah, no, of course. But if you look at the government, what we've seen since Corona is that all governments have taken this as a reason to enforce their mandates. Right.
Absolutely.
And you can believe that's for the good or the bad. That's, I think, just comes down to whatever person. But different countries are looking for different solutions, right? So here in Holland, we've hardly done any of the mask. Made only in the trains we've made it mandatory, the trains and the buses. But we're very strict on the social distancing. And I went to Turkey, Istanbul. And basically in Istanbul, you have so many people living in a city. It's so crowded, so many little alleyways. It's impossible to have social distancing there.
Right.
So instead they said, well, we'll do the mask. And it's exactly like you say, it's the proof is neither here or there. And I think the same with social distancing. You just don't know how many meters is enough. And if you put people in the same room, the virus will still circulate in the air.
I was not expecting to be outnumbered here, guys. Look,
no.
I'll let you finish your sentence before I tell you both while you're wrong. So.
I just think governments are trying to come up with solutions that they think is in their right to enforce on the public to stop it. And different countries make different decisions. And
I got two metaphors for you, right? One is about the efficiency of masks. And one is about the necessity for government rules. Okay? Like, there's a reason why surgeons in an operating room wear coverings over their faces. And you would want a surgeon wearing that. Both of you would. Quite simply, if you're in a crowded elevator and the guy in front of you isn't wearing a belt and his shorts slip down and he sharts, would you rather there be underwear in between you and him or not? Choose one.
Sure, I would
That's
prefer
why
that,
we
but I
have
don't want the
masks.
state to mandate it.
No one wants to be sharted on from the
of course
guy in
not.
front of them.
I mean, we
not
mandate
wearing
clothes as
underwear.
well. We mandate clothes in public as well for fairly good
Yeah,
reasons. You don't
can
you
get in
want to
trouble
have
for
naked.
running around naked. Yes.
Yeah.
Sure,
that's
but
not
in
a
your
good thing either.
example, we don't mandate underwear, and I don't necessarily think that we need to.
Okay, but we wear clothes because it's
Yes,
reasonable.
we do.
And you understand why masks work and why surgeons wear them for the same reason why a shart is a dangerous thing you should avoid.
Yeah, but I would say an operating room where you have an open cavity is very different than just walking around the grocery store. Number one. Number two,
if you look at the
not.
contagiousness of this disease, clearly not. And look, this experiment's been done
and how it's
1,000 times. Look at East Asia that wear masks as a standard. Look at America that rebels against it every time.
Here, I'm gonna break it down to what's actually important, though. It doesn't matter how much it spreads. What matters is how many people it kills. And now we're seeing that only 6% in the United States of what they were calling coronavirus deaths had only corona. Every other one, 94%, had an underlying condition besides coronavirus, which means it's statistically killing almost nobody.
No, that's not what it means.
6% is that's under
Define
10,000.
underlying condition, because if you did delve into it, which I have, underlying condition is things such as high blood pressure, which you'd be surprised how common it is.
Sure.
And if you look at it,
but it also includes stuff like stage 4 cancer.
Let me finish, right? Sure, but that's not the majority of people. And there's this conspiracy theory that for some reason governments are intentionally wrecking their economies because obviously that's what every government in the world loves to do to win an election. Sure, maybe. But more likely, governments are actually suppressing the statistics. And when you go, there's an underlying condition, if you delve in there, it's not stage 4 cancer. It's 9 times out of 10 diabetes, high blood pressure, asthma. Now, we all know people with those conditions. And that is not, oh, yeah, they were sick, fuck them, they should have died anyway. No, like an underlying condition should not be a death sentence. If you have diabetes and you get eaten by a bear,
but it's also not anyone else's responsibility to protect them until it gets mandated, and that's where I have a problem. They shouldn't be mandating that I am concerned with somebody else's health.
So let's go on to that argument, right? The government mandates that you drive, we all drive on the same side of that road. Now you can shout freedom and drive on the other side of the road,
sure,
but you're not free to do that because it's a dick move. Like, that's not mandating, like, against your freedom. It's just, look, guys, people are dying. But people will die if we do this.
Somewhere are somewhat against your freedom. They have to be, by definition. It's a mandate. Somehow it's telling you have to do this or you can't do something that you could do before. So we'll just have to agree to disagree on the matter.
Let's disagree more. It's too easy to agree to disagree.
I agree.
If this was 100 years ago and someone wanted to lick a rat and the government was like, please stop licking rats, and you're like, no, I want to lick rats, freedom. No, it's nonsense, guys. Like, masks are a good idea.
Right. The mandate
they would have put him down.
Absolutely, the mandate is absolute nonsense.
What? No.
Yes, it is. It is.
Well, it's a strange thing to say.
More deaths than anyone. The most skeptical country. The best experiment ever is Scandinavia, right? Which always, God, right-wing talking heads love to talk about as a socialist dystopia. Scandinavia, right? 3 out of 4 of them went masks, social distancing, yes. 1 went, nah, sorry, we're skeptical. And so Sweden decided, no, sorry, we're not going to do that. We're not going to wear masks. Their numbers are through the roof. The proof is that this experiment has been run. And if you want a conspiracy theory, I have literally watched this because I grew up in Asia, right?
Mm-hmm.
So their masks are just a thing. If you have a cold, you wear a mask. They did it because of SARS, they did it because of MERS, they did it because of bird flu. They've just learned that wearing a mask kills the thing quicker. which
Okay.
is why mostly those countries have recovered, and we're still fucked.
All right. And
Because we're
Asia's a
free
perfect
to do it.
example. Did they mandate the mask, or is it just part of their culture?
Well,
In China,
in China, they mandated everything.
they
Yeah.
banned
Well,
fucking
yeah,
in
but-
China they put tanks around
but-
Wuhan and
but
shot
But what I'm
anyone
getting
who
at
tried
is
to
for,
leave.
for say having a cold, which they typically will wear a mask for a cold. Is there a mandate that if you have a cold, you need to wear a mask, or do they just do it out of some cultural politeness?
Well, so this is the funny thing. First they mandated it, and this leads on to the point I'm trying to make. Like, first they mandated it, then once they learned where it was working, where it wasn't, culture catches on. But that catching on is slow. I've watched this travel west, right? So you look in Europe, 4 months ago, right? Europe was skeptical, and I was telling everyone, in Asia everyone wears masks, and these pandemics, they die down really quickly because everyone just wears a mask and it's over in a month, and then you're fine. And everyone was skeptical, and it was really fun. You want a conspiracy theory here? You want to top down the government fucking with us? I've literally seen when there's a shortage of masks, government go quiet on it and not have an opinion. And when there's enough masks, they're like, okay, what we failed to mention for the last 2 months is masks actually work. And I'm pretty sure right now, just as in Western Europe 3 months ago, there's not enough masks in America for everyone to wearing it, which is why they're fine for doubt to go. And when there is enough fucking masks, watch the story change. Okay, guys, now you can wear masks. It's fine.
That's always possible. I've never put past the government shenanigans like that.
That's the conspiracy. Trust. And we watch this in Europe. Germany, because Germany has manufacturing, the rest of Europe doesn't, right? Obvious exceptions, easy to disprove. Fight me in the comments. But Germany had so many masks, and then they just literally, like, tyrannical government stopped it from being exported. They were like, nope. All these countries ordering masks. They were like, nope, our masks. And then Germany said, okay, you must wear a mask. And then the numbers start going down.
Well, here's the other thing I would point out with a mandate, especially in the US. If it was a suggestion, I think more people would be fine with it and just voluntarily go along with it than if they mandated it. Kind of a flies with honey, flies with vinegar. You have to do it, or you should. We'd really like you to. You can argue how stupid that may be, but the delivery matters for the message.
Do you understand why I worry about America? You guys are like so proud that we're like, hey guys, this will stop you dying, and you're like, I can die if I want, and you're like, oh my god, this is what a declining empire sounds like. You guys are too proud. Like, I won't save my life unless you ask me nicely. You're like, okay, it's like, to quote Pulp Fiction, pretty please, with sugar on top, wear a fucking mask. Like, oh my god.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, I can see that. And I don't necessarily have an argument against that one.
I love you guys. I worry for you guys. I think if you had more masks, your government would be saying it nice, carrot and stick, sugar and honey and shit, and all the things above. I think you have a shortage of masks, which is why the debate still rages on.
All right. Well, we have hit 1 hour.
I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
So I
had so much to get into. We need to do this again.
We'll have to have you back, or I can come on your show, or vice versa.
That would be awesome. You'd always be welcome.
Yeah, great.
But I always like to end with letting our guests promote whatever they want to promote. So we'll start with you, Chris. Any website, social media, whatever you'd like to get out there.
I'd really like to promote talking with people that you don't necessarily agree with. And even if you don't like find common ground, not even try and persuade them, just have, like we've had today, just an enjoyable conversation. Like, for me, that's the most important thing. Honestly, God, the world needs more of it.
Yes, I agree.
We could all do with learning. We could all do with listening. So that's all I need to promote. Thank you so much.
All right, Marin, do you have anything you want to promote on your own, or just the podcast in general?
No, certainly. Well, I'm not gonna even mention our podcast. I don't want to do the self-promoting. What I would really want to do is promote a website called The Correspondent.
Okay.
And the reason for that is we were talking before about the news media having becoming clickbait. News is all about what is important, what is outrageous right now, what is the news of the day, what is the thing going on somewhere in the world today that we can get angry about and passionate about, and this is bad or this should be different. And what the correspondent is trying to do, it comes from people that were in the media in the Netherlands. They've gone international. It's a crowd-funded website, so they do not take any money except from the people that give them money every month. And they write articles that are long studies. So it's something that has been investigated for a while. It sometimes is up to date with the current situation, but they try to be not the news of the day, but maybe more the news of the couple months or the last years. And this is qualitative articles.
All right. And is that what's the URL for that? The correspondent dot.
Let me just see, because you can find them on Facebook as The Correspondent, but it's thecorrespondent.com, thecorrespondent.com. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, guys. This has been Chris and Maren from the Beyond Binary Thinking podcast, and I encourage everybody to check that out. You definitely gained a new fan in me. And like you said, Chris, just have conversations. You don't have to pick a side, or even if you do pick a side, argue it and remain friends like I hope we have today. So thank you guys for coming on.
Thanks, mate. I hope when it's possible, I hope we get the chance to meet face to face and share a beer together. All right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Very pleased now to introduce a song from a long-time listener and great friend of the show. This is Andrew Sloman, Silence.
It's time to command some silence. We can't rule anymore with these lies. Oppressed by a hand of violence. Masked by a smile for disguise. So what's this bullshit that we're selling here? Don't lecture me. See, I ain't buying into the army of hypocrisy. See, you've confused me with somebody who bully again and 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 again. It's time to demand defiance. Why can't we let people be? Led by the fools of ignorance. Side is the real enemy. So what's this bullshit that they're selling here? Don't lecture me. See, I ain't buying into the army of hypocrisy. See, you've confused me with somebody who bully again and again